Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. I'm here with a special guest. The founder of the DraftBernie party now has a big announcement today. It's Nick Brana. Hi, Nick. How are you?
Hey, Jimmy. It's great to join you again.
So I understand you have an announcement to make. You've been working with a lot of different people on the left, and you have an announcement today. So please lay it on us.
That's right. So, back when we started DraftBernie, very few people were talking about creating a new party. I mean, the talk was all about, oh, let's reform the Democratic Party. In the past 9 months, that we have entirely flipped the script. Now, the talk out there among progressives is, excited talk about starting a new party. And we have built up support to the point where, like the majority of Americans, majority of progressives are now clamoring for a new party. And that has opened up the possibility for our next stage. That has laid the groundwork for our next stage, which is, I'm happy to announce that we are launching the Movement for a People's Party in order to bring progressive organizations together, create a coalition of progressive groups, progressive unions, labor, community organizations, working people, and everyone else who really has a stake in building something new. Because that kind of coalition is what it's going to take to build a really nationally viable People's Party that can take down an establishment party.
Now, tell me again the name of this coalition.
It's a Movement for a People's Party is what we are morphing into. That is what we're launching, and that's our coalition effort. And the coalition itself will be something that we build with many different organizations. As we speak to all these people who are coming to the conclusion that there is no future for progressives inside the Democratic Party. Jimmy, you covered recently the way that unions are taking an interest.
Yes,
That's an amazing development. The AFL-CIO recently had its conference. Not only did they not invite Democrats to the conference as they traditionally have this year, but they also approved a resolution to break with the lesser of two evils.
Yes, they did.
They also had a meeting. There was a meeting about 50 union leaders and delegates that got together to discuss the idea of forming a labor party. And God, is it time for that?
So, yes, we covered that on this show. Nick, did you see that covered anywhere else?
No, it's amazing. It went completely under the radar. No talk about it. You know what else I didn't see covered? Gallup does an annual poll of the number of people in the United States who are calling for a third party, want one. It has reached a record high this year. 61%, almost 2-to-1 Americans are calling for a new party. Most incredibly, Jimmy, and what makes me laugh the most is that now most Democrats, people who call themselves Democrats, are also calling for a third party. They say, quote, the Democratic Party does such a poor job that a major third party is needed. I mean, it has reached kind of like a laughable proportion.
Well, it's especially after the Donna Brazil revelations. It just goes to show you that what Shama Sawant has said on this show and what I've been repeating is absolutely true. That they'd rather lose to a Republican than win with a progressive. So there really is a graveyard inside the Democratic Party for progressive movements. But so tell me all the people that you've been talking to on the left that you are going to get to coalesce around. Is the idea to get everybody to coalesce around a platform? Is that, because you've been talking to the Greens and the Democratic Socialists and the Socialists. And so tell me what those conversations are like and what is the plan?
So the idea is to be able to get all of these organizations together that want a progressive future, and particularly organizations that have decided that what that needs to be is it needs to take the shape of a new party. It needs to take the shape because the Democrats and Republicans are not going to provide that alternative. And so the idea is speaking to those different organizations and seeing how is it that we can, combine our resources, not necessarily merge and to become the same group. This is obviously something that's very sensitive when you're dealing with organizations who, each has their own identity. They have their own way of doing things. But how is it that we can come to the table and really collaborate to do this. And one of the things that surprised me most after the Convergence Conference, Jimmy, was that one of the most successful strategies for progressives around the world, because this revolution against neoliberalism is really global, and one of the most successful strategies for really challenging, even replacing establishment parties, is forming coalitions of progressive groups that when they come together, what we've found in examples like Podemos in Spain and Syriza in Greece and Frente Amplio in Chile, new parties that have formed, also parties that have formed in France, is that when they come together in these kinds of coalitions, they add up to more than the sum of their parts. And I think that's a lot of what's missing in the progressive independent left now, Jimmy, is we have the numbers. You know, the majority of the country is with us in terms of the issues and in terms of wanting a new party, but we're too diffuse. We're too spread out. We're too atomized. And so we really need to come together, converge, create this center of gravity that can begin to attract more and more and more people and take off as the progressive alternative that people are asking for.
So this seems like an obvious idea. It also, when you think about it, it seems a lot harder than it appears on its face. But because you were saying that, so you have all these different progressive groups, like the Greens and the Democratic Socialists. So you're not saying that they're going to dissolve and create a new group. That's not what you're saying. You're saying that they're going to keep their individual parties and their individual identities, but you're going to coalesce around ideas, right? Progressive ideas, and then we're going to.
Right.
So would you then slate candidates, or what? How would that work?
So the idea is to create kind of a coalition that can determine, well, how is it that we can collaborate to best advance independent politics, and we personally hope that results in a nationally viable party, because that is the ultimate goal. That's what we need. We can do a lot of other things. In the meantime, like we could make endorsements of particular independent candidates as a group. But what we really need is a tremendous shakeup in this country's politics. And that kind of thing is only going to be achieved if we can come together in a coalition that is prefigurative of a new party. And that's the kind of thing that would really like to do. Okay,
so have you talked to anybody from labor yet? Have you been speaking with anybody from the AFL-CIO or SEIU or Randy Weingarten or anybody like that?
So we've spoken to a number of people who work with unions, yes. And right now we're kind of fielding interest. Is who is it that will be willing to come to the table? Who is it that's interested in this kind of thing? Those folks who met, for example, in that meeting that the AFL-CIO had of union delegates to discuss the idea of creating a labor party. It's like, so who's interested there? Who's interested elsewhere? People everywhere across the country are interested, but there really isn't some kind of there isn't some major converging force. And so that's what there needs to be. That's the idea of speak to as many of these people as possible.
So would this be, and I hope I'm not being too ridiculous, pregnant, but would this be like an umbrella organization? So you could say, I'm with the Labor Party, but we're all under this on one big umbrella, or how would that work?
The new party would hopefully be an umbrella organization, as would the coalition. Not that the coalition would dictate to the individual groups, but the individual groups could come together, because again, that's difficult. It's always difficult, when you're dealing with groups that exist and have their own way of operating and doing things. And so rather having the groups come into a coalition that is something new, formed by the act of them coming together, that can then launch a new party.
Okay. And so
something nationally viable.
And so now what do progressives do who watch this show, who want to make sure that we have a viable third party that is progressive? What could they do to help?
So as in our DraftBernie phase of organizing and building up support for a new party, what we have been doing is simply we've had thousands of volunteers across the country and on social media who every day are having conversations. They're having conversations with other organizations. They're going to the meetings of other of local chapters of DSA or Our Revolution, and they're speaking to those organizations, speaking to community organizations. They're participating in volunteering for other organizations as well. And in that process, they're having conversations with them and talking to them about how we can have the best platform in the world, but it doesn't mean anything unless we can implement it. So we really need to think about these strategic questions about how is it that progressives come to power? Because in our view, we have succeeded in spades in bringing the country over to a progressive way of thinking. But at the same time, this kind of dilemma has emerged between building support for progressive policies and taking power electorally. And so the more progressive that Americans have become, the more they've actually seen through the Democratic Party, realized that it isn't progressive, and then left the Democratic Party or refused to turn out in elections for it, which leads to this, this conundrum whereby the more progressive the country gets, the more people leave the existing left party, being the Democrats, and so the way to break that cycle, that vicious cycle, which is what brought Trump to power, is to create this new party.
Okay, well, will there be a link? Is there a website? Is it your old website? How do people connect?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a new website. It is forapeoplesparty.org. And so, that is where you can plug in. You can join the folks who are speaking to other organizations and other progressives in their communities, who are on social media talking to people, every day. Come and join us. We'd love to have you with us. This is how the revolution builds, from the grassroots up. And I think that this process of creating a new party that genuinely represents progressives, genuinely represents working people, genuinely represents the majority of Americans, that is the political revolution, Jimmy.
I agree. There's no doubt about it. We need a party that represents workers. We needed a party that represents regular people and not just suburbanite one percenters. So we need a party for the 99%. And I think you're, like you said, people know it. And so you're the one spearheading this movement. And if it can be done, we're going to see if we can do it. So I think it's fantastic. We'll put a link underneath to your website, and you are starting the conversation, right? So this isn't an end or a beginning. This is right now. You're continuing what you started with DraftBernie, and now you're opening it up to everybody on the left and everyone. It's amazing, Nick. It's how underreported the unions coming together and demanding a third labor party. The fact that that didn't get any press anywhere, especially at MSNBC with a guy like Chris Hayes, who used to be a union reporter, he didn't even mention it. So it is amazing. There's a movement happening, and the establishment does not want to recognize it. And so, but it's happening. So just like they didn't want to recognize Bernie Sanders, it happened, right? And now he found out that he would have been president if the establishment didn't cheat him. So instead of trying to reform that stupid establishment that's broken, obviously, and doesn't want anything to do with us, we're going to try and start another establishment that's actually pro-worker and pro-progressive. That's the whole idea here.
These two revelations, Jimmy, like back to back, that have really, rocked progressives, of the DNC purge, and then Donna Brazil's article, revealing that the DNC acted as more of a subsidiary of the Clinton campaign than anything else, so completely driven by the Clinton campaign's decisions. And so all of those things, whether it was the debate schedule or when they took our access of a van, all those things, all of a sudden becomes so much more clear they were driven from the Clinton campaign. And in reality, the result was determined, before a single vote was cast. And so I think that when you combine the just outrageous rigging that happened in the 2016 primary with the fact that 2 weeks before that, the DNC purged Bernie members from its national committee, purged progressives, and they also they placed 0 progressives on the DNC Rules Committee. The DNC Rules Committee is the committee that's responsible for creating the rules that are going to drive the primary in 2020 and 2018. And so hold on a minute. We just found out that they cheated us to such an astonishing degree, and they have given progressives no reforms in the primaries and ensured that we have no representation in designing the primary process or recreating it whatsoever. They affirmed in court that the primaries are, that they are in fact a private club, a private corporation, and that they have no accountability to their members, no responsibility for impartiality. So why in the world, how can any progressive justify, all of the people bled and they sacrificed for Bernie in 2016, Jimmy. They worked like, I worked on the campaign and I got paid for it. But I know people out there who are now with us at DraftBernie, and they gave their heart and soul to that campaign, and it turns out that campaign was determined from the beginning. And I cannot see how any progressive can justify working inside that party again, in another presidential election, just knowing that same dynamic, that nothing has been done to correct it.
I agree. That's why I'm urging Bernie Sanders to make a big bold. You want to reform the Democratic Party, Bernie? The best way to do it is to form a credible third-party challenge to that, and that would actually represent workers and would actually represent progressives. So that would be the only thing that's going to change them, and we might have to get rid of them. So the idea that Bernie Sanders is still trying to sheepdog people into the Democratic Party is a big mistake, and it's just sad to see that even somebody who's right on the issues can be 100% wrong on strategy. And it was a bad strategy to try to prop up Hillary Clinton afterwards, because we got Donald Trump anyway. And, at least he could have made a big difference last time, ran as the Green Party. He could have gotten 15, 20% of the vote and completely changed politics in our country going forward forever. But instead, he didn't. And now people still want change. People voted for change in 2008. They voted for change in 2010, 12, 14, and they did it again in 16. Guess what? They just did it last night again, or on Tuesday, they did it again. Are you afraid that the establishment, because the Virginia elected yet another Democratic establishment, that they've always had Democratic governors in Virginia, and all of a sudden everybody's making a big deal out of it? What happened in Virginia, Nick, and what happened on Tuesday was the Republicans made the same mistake the Democrats made in 2016, was they ran on social issues. Ed Gillespie ran on kneeling at the football games. He ran on Confederate statues and bathroom breaks and transgender. So that was his big mistake, because and you should have an economic message, which the Republicans don't have, because they have a record. The only reason why Trump's populism worked, it only worked once, because he didn't have a record. Right? So he can come in and say all this stuff, and he could be a Republican populist, which, as Ron Placone points out, is a contradiction in terms. That's no such thing, right? So, but that's because Trump was actually an outsider, and he really wasn't a member of the Republican Party. So if you look at it like that, look what happened in France. They just invented two new parties because people got sick of the old ones. And then here in the United States, we had two people who aren't members of those parties. Trump took over his party, and Bernie would have if he wasn't cheated out of it. So that's where we are right now. People are done with these two parties. It is time to move. And Bernie seems like now, once he got the country to this point to move away from those two-party structures, the thing he's railed against his whole career, now he's using all his power to prop up that goddamn duopoly, which makes absolutely no sense, which just goes to show you you can be right on the issues and wrong on strategy, which Bernie is 1,000% right now.
The founder of the Working Families Party, I think it's Dan Cantor, who said this. He puts it best. You don't take the Democratic Party over; it takes you over. And
in Russia, party take you over.
So the only thing that I think we've seen in the past year, we've had a year now to reflect on, this effort to take over the Democratic Party. Millions of dollars spent, endless numbers of petitions, phone calls, sit-ins, volunteering, just an incredible expenditure. And what do we have to show for it? What do we have to show for it in terms of changing the Democratic Party? And so, one of the things that's most concerning in my mind is that faith in institutions, confidence in institutions in the U.S. is at historic lows. All like branches of government, big business, television media, also affiliation with the Democrats and Republicans, also at historic lows. The number of people calling for a major new party is at record highs. The number of independents, record highs. These are long-term trends, and they show no sign of slowing down. And they're unsustainable, Jimmy. Like that there will be a great political realignment in our country. And in my mind, it's less of a question of whether there's going to be a new party. That, to me, is a foregone conclusion. I have seen enough to think that there will. But rather, the question is, what is it going to stand for, and who's going to be behind it? And if we don't get our act together as progressives, Jimmy, then I promise you, the right wing, that populist right wing, represented by Trump and Bannon and Mercer, they will beat us to the punch. What happens when Bannon's candidates get shot down by the RNC? Is he just going to walk away? I don't think so. And also, then you have things like what the French elites did in France with Macron. And so they propped up a neoliberal as a third way. He kind of masqueraded as a beyond left and right candidate, and that worked long enough for him to win. And his popularity has now plummeted. And so, if we don't get our act together, Jimmy, someone is going to beat us to the punch, whether it's Bannon, whether it's a billionaire who sees this new political reality and decides to seize upon it, who sees that the large plurality of Americans are now independent, and that is a terrifying prospect because we saw what happened in 2016 when the right beat us to the punch with Trump.
Yeah.
So Americans have shown that they really want a progressive populist alternative to the establishment parties, but if progressives don't offer it to them, they will settle for a right-wing alternative, and that's terrifying. And so, there is a real urgency here for us to come together and offer people, what Naomi Klein and Chris Hedges call, a yes. Offer them a vision, an alternative, something that's genuinely anti-establishment. Or I promise you, the right wing is going to fill that void.
Wow, very well said, Nick. And I think someone needs to remind people that. So, all the people I know who voted for Hillary they have no new ideas. They're all saying the same. It's just, well, we're going to try and get better Democrats. And it's like, how do you, what else do you need to be shown to you that they don't want anything to do with reform? They're not reforming, and it's over for you. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this with us. We're going to put a link right underneath this video, and we'll check in with you along the way. The Jimmy Dore Show is here to help all things progressive, and we'd love to help you out. We had a great time and meeting all the people at the convention in D.C. when we went there. That was fantastic. You did a lot of great work setting that up. I got to meet Cornel West. He got to call me brother. I felt great about it. So anyway, Nick, thanks for coming on. And any last words you want to tell anybody?
Yeah, it was great to have you there, Jimmy, and Steph and Ron. I can hear you guys in the background. And the last thing I'll say is that it wasn't progressives in the progressives in the 20th century. It wasn't progressives asking nicely of the Democrats or Republicans that got children out of the coal mines. It wasn't progressives asking nicely that won the 40-hour work week or women's suffrage or abolition or Social Security. All of these major policies, all of these major progressive advances and landmark achievements in our own history in the United States have a major third party behind them. Even the New Deal, Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal had Norman Thomas, the socialist candidate, pushing him to do it. And so as we reflect upon, the state of our movement, I think the big missing ingredient is that we lack the leverage that those movements that achieved child working laws, ban labor conditions and Social Security and the 40-hour work week, What we're missing is the leverage of a major third party. We're missing a major external force that makes it so that when we say, you have to reform, as we've been saying for the past year, and more decades actually, that there is an or else to that.
Right.
You have to reform or else we're going to do something else. It's not just, you have to reform or we're going to start another petition that, asks you to reform again. We're going to respond to, you ignored, and there's a lot of progressives out there who are still saying, the Democratic Party has ignored all of our suggestions for reform for the past year. That's outrageous. Here's a new list of suggestions for reform. So, like, come on. At what point do we say enough is enough? Like, you either reform, which you haven't. At what point do we place that in past tense, Jimmy, and say you did not reform, and now it's not you that needs to learn your lesson, it's us. We need to learn our lesson. Fool us once, that's on you. Fool us 10,000 times, new party.
New party. Okay. All right. Nick, I'm riled up for it. I'm willing to work for it, do what I can. I think a lot of people are ready for it. Well, you said Gallup just figured out 61% of Americans want a third party. So, of course, we won't get it. No, listen, Nick, thanks for your hard work. And again, anytime you need to come back on, you make such great salient points. And everybody loves you here. So we'll talk to you soon, buddy.